And now joining us, we have former Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer of California, and we have former Republican Congressman from Virginia, Denver Riggleman. Good to have you both. Congressman, I want to start with you. Speaker Johnson has a new op-ed out in the Wall Street Journal saying that House Republicans had a great year. And I'm wondering, I guess, did House Republicans have a great year as we see people defecting, retiring early? We hear rumors that more may come. What do you give him? What's the report card?
Probably a D-. I mean, it's really difficult as a former Republican to look at that based on data, based on facts, based on the economy right now to say it was a banner year. I mean, there's certainly some mixed signals in the economy. There's some things you could probably point to that aren't awful. But when you look at what they did, shirking work to get around votes, especially for the Epstein files, when you look at what's going on with tariffs specifically, it's very, very difficult. You know, I have a tech business, right? I have a pretty robust technology business, but I also own distilleries. My wife's a CEO. When you get 50% tariffs and supply chain increases off the charts, you have to halt production. And what we're looking at across the board in our industry in spirits and liquor and beer, you have these massive issues, and that issues goes to farmers when you're looking at the bailout and things of that nature. And when I read the op-ed from Mike Johnson, I was just struck that it missed, really all the bad things, but that's politics. I mean, that's what they have to do. But the fact that you would say they had a banner year when they missed so much work, the bills that they passed. Now, number of bills really doesn't matter, but the quality of bills do. And I think right now when you're looking at the quality, it's just not there. And I also believe that the three things that are really hurting them, and that I'm going to turn it over to the senator, when you're looking at MAGA, is they've hit the three buttons that are really bad, right? The Epstein files, you go into the conspiratorial nature of MAGA. Second is healthcare. It's going to hit red districts. And the third, MAGA is inherently nationalistic, right? When you're talking about starting wars overseas, those three things are showing that maybe it isn't all that rosy in the GOP right now.
Senator Boxer, I want your breakdown. You can react to that, but I also want to ask you a sort of broader question about the state of the Democratic Party and the strategizing on that side. We started this year with Democrats feeling very dejected, a little lost in the wilderness, worried that there would be infighting, that basically Republicans would run away wild with control of sort of every lever of government, that they would be unified. And now we're ending the year, and it appears that Republicans are dealing with a lot of their infighting, weren't able to accomplish as much as their constituents maybe expected and hoped that they would. And Democrats seem to have higher hopes. How did this happen?
Well, I want to start off to say to the congressman, he was so honest and direct, and I so appreciate that. It isn't easy to criticize your own party. I've had to criticize mine. It's not easy. But everything he said was on target. I would say this, when I saw that headline, House Republicans had a great year, I'm reading that for you. The first word I thought of was delusional. And I decided to look up the definition of delusional. So I'm going to read it to everybody. Delusional, holding false judgments about reality despite clear evidence to the contrary. And, how he could write this, it's almost an insult to the American people who were crying out to everybody, to Democrats, to Republicans. They're saying, please pay attention to us. We are in trouble. Everyday Americans are very worried. 20 million are on the brink of losing their health care. Your big, beautiful, brutal bill said yes to the billionaires and, said no to everyone else. How do you pay for these tax cuts? Well, you're cutting everything that middle-class families and working poor people rely on: education, health research. We're just hearing more and more younger people dying tragically of cancer, including a former senator I served with and JFK's granddaughter, we just learned. It's tragic. Guess what the Republicans are doing? They're cutting back health research on cancer, even childhood cancer. They've taken literally food out of the mouths of hungry children, cutting back child nutrition, veterans cuts. And the whole thing is so awful for the people. So for Mike Johnson to be so, shall we say, tone deaf is the nicest way I could say it, to the reality is shocking. And for us Democrats, yeah, we've got our differences, but we know we're not them. We're not going to do that. We're going to fight for everyday Americans. And I think that's what separates the parties at this point.
You know, Congressman, a little earlier this year, Steve Bannon mused in a media appearance or a podcast sort of video appearance that Congress was almost irrelevant. He compared it to the Duma in Russia, sort of parliament known for basically rubber stamping whatever Putin wants to do. And I thought that was an interesting comparison from someone who is aligned with Trump and has been in his orbit and around his people, for him to basically say that even his sort of allies in Congress aren't doing much and aren't really there to serve their own constituents. That's kind of what he was implying there. Do you agree with that assessment? Has Congress, at least over the course of the last year, seemed irrelevant?
My goodness, I never thought there'd be a time where I agreed with Steve Bannon.
Sorry to put you in that position.
He is an avowed, thanks a lot. But he is an avowed Leninist, so he would know what the Duma is, right? So, he's said that that's what he is. So I think right now when you're looking at what they're doing, they're just simply following whatever Trump wants to do, and they're absolutely terrified. When you talked about delusional, and I'm glad the senator used that since I was on the J6 committee, and I know what delusional looks like as far as what happened that day. I think when you're looking at Mike Johnson, I think his biggest fear is making sure or is actually disappointing Trump. I also think when you're looking at the Epstein files and what he's had to do to sort of run around that, I think that does suggest that just maybe Congress isn't worried about their constituents. They're worried about protecting a president who had a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So I think that's where we're at right now. And you're looking at the bills that are being passed. They're really just down the line for what Trump wants to do. But Congress has pretty much said, hey, we don't want power here. We don't want the decision making. We're more worried about our polling and our fundraising in our districts and making sure that we're actually aligned with whatever the favorability rating is for Trump in our R+6 districts and above. But here's the problem. When you're doing that, and when you're in rural districts and you're looking at what they're doing in manufacturing, you look what they're doing with tariffs, and you're looking at what they're doing with the farmers and the bailout, that stuff backfires. I just don't understand how they're not seeing this, or they are seeing it, but there's no way they seem to have the moral courage to stand up and say enough of this. And, to see Marjorie Taylor Greene come out, I tell you what, that's a surprise, right? I mean, she's really out there now. And I think that's the first break. I think you're seeing even people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's as MAGA-centric as there gets, saying, hey, the Trump administration's off the rails. That should tell people something.
Senator Boxer, I also want to ask you about Leader Jeffries. He has a new sort of Dear Colleagues letter out, and he's also planning to convene a hearing because they're in the minority, I think it'll probably just be Democrats essentially gathering to commemorate, to mark January 6th. First, I want to ask, how you reflect as we get closer to the 5-year anniversary here, and what that day, I guess, represents to our country at this point, since so many people who denied the election results continue to be in power, and to sort of undermine the rhetoric and our sort of democratic fabric on the day-to-day. And then how do you think Leader Jeffries is going to use that moment at the start of the year to try to chart a different path forward?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to answer as best I can. First, I want to give a shout out to Hakeem Jeffries, because he's not standing up there as the top Democrat in the Congress saying, look at me, look how great I am, look at all the good things I tried to do, but if it wasn't for them, I could have done. This is what Johnson does. I'm great, even though there's 17% approval of the Congress. But Jeffries is not calling attention to himself. He's doing something so important, which is raising up the spirits of the law enforcement people at the Capitol, who literally saved our democracy that day. I served 10 years in the House. It was a wonderful experience. I left because I thought I'd done it long enough. Then I went to the Senate for 24 years, and I was retired, and I looked at what was happening on the floor of the Senate and the floor of the House. I don't even want to go into the details. But the bottom line is we really had, an insurrection. And it was, brave Mike Pence for doing what he did. And these brave, wonderful law enforcement people who literally saved us that day. So I'm very proud of Hakeem Jeffries. He's not saying, look at me, another narcissist. He's saying, look at these men and women in uniform. Let's thank them. And let's never forget that we have to fight for our democracy. And, to me, this is really important going forward. This election is going to be one of the most important ever. I know a lot of people, we say that a lot. But honestly, if we don't have a check and balance on this would-be king, God knows where we wind up.